Welcome back everyone to another week of Guild Deck Techs. I'm Joseph, and this week I'm covering the Gruul Guild, putting us in red and green. Our commander today is Leafkin Avenger. Leafkin Avenger is a 4/3 elemental druid for 2 red-green that has tap, add green mana for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. So one thing I want to note is that because Leafkin Avenger's power is itself 4, this means that this will always tap for at least 1 green mana. It also has pay 7 and a red. Leafkin Avenger deals damage equal to its power to target player or planeswalker. So on this second ability, I was interested to see 2 things. First, it isn't a tap ability, so we can use it after our commander has been tapped for mana. But that first ability only gives us green mana, so we do need at least one source of red mana to use this ability. So what is our strategy for this deck? We're going to fill our deck with as many creatures with power 4 or greater as we can. Then we're either going to overrun our opponents with huge creatures or abuse our commander for big mana effects and take them out. First things first, we need to worry about ramp. Our deck is going to be full of big butts and we're going to need lots of mana to get them out. Luckily, our commander taps for mana, but more is always better. We've got Goblin and Archomancer, a 2/2 Goblin Shaman for a red and green that has each spell you cast that's red or green costs 1 mana less to cast. So this is going to be our one-stop shop for reducing cost, making every card in our deck a mana cheaper. I was also able to find some mana dorks that care about a power of 4, our magic number. So for this we've got Elysian Caryatid, a 1/1 plant for 1 and a green that has tap, add 1 mana of any color. And if we control a creature with power 4 or greater, add 2 mana of any one color instead. So this will come down early, but as soon as our commander hits the field, it's going to double in effectiveness. Elysian Caryatid will even mana fix us in case we need red instead of green. But with all that mana we're going to be making, it would be smart of us to save some of it. So for that, we've got Everflowing Chalice, an artifact for 0 mana that has Multi-Kicker 2, and it enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it for each time it was kicked, and finally we can tap it and add a colorless mana for each charge counter on Everflowing Chalice. So this will allow us to save up some mana for some truly incredible turns. More importantly, it's going to be an artifact and less vulnerable than our smaller creatures. Speaking of, this deck does have some smaller creatures. We can't spend the first few turns doing nothing, right? So for that, we've got Croconura and Crunch Wrangler. They're going to start off small, but they're not going to stay that way. Croconura is a 1/3 crocodile frog for 2 and a green that has reach and evolve. So whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, if that creature has greater power or toughness than Croconura, put a +1 counter on Croconura. Crunch Wrangler is a 2/1 human warrior for 1 and a green that has trample, and whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1 counter on Crunch Wrangler. So these creatures are going to gain +1 counters each time one of our larger creatures enters the battlefield, until they're huge themselves. Croconura will eventually hit a limit where we can't cast anything with higher power or toughness, but Crunch Wrangler is only limited by how many times we can cast a +4 power creature. And now onto the Stompy Boys, who do what Gruul does best. Now you can really fill this section with whatever high power creatures you want, but I filtered mine for the best utility that I could. So we've got creatures that buff our team, like Kadoltha Ringleader, a 4/4 giant berserker that has Battle Cry, so whenever this creature attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Then we've got creatures that gain life, like Fangren Marauder, a 5/5 beast with whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may gain 5 life. Then we've got creatures for removal, like Conclave Naturalists and Wild Celebrants, creatures that when they enter the battlefield will destroy artifacts or enchantments. And then we've even got one of the biggest Stompy Boys of all, Ulamog's Crusher, an 8/8 Eldrazi for 8 mana that has Annihilator 2, so whenever this creature attacks, defending player must sacrifice 2 permanents. Another card that I also like is Bannerhead Krushok. It's a 4/4 beast for 3 and a green that has Trample and Reinforce 2, so we spend 1 and a green and discard this card to put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. It also has Scavenge for 5 green, so we spend 5 green and exile this from our graveyard to put 4 +1/+1 counters on target creature. So this one card has Trample, Reinforce, and Scavenge, meaning that whatever zone it's in, it is going to give us value. Supporting these are going to be other cards that care about high power. Beacon Behemoth is a 5/3 beast for 3 green that has pay 1, target creature with power 5 or greater gains vigilance until end of turn. And Stampeding Elk Herd is a 5/5 elk for 3 green that has Formidable. Whenever this creature attacks, if creatures you control have total power 8 or greater, all of our creatures will gain trample until end of turn. We can also take advantage of our high power creatures with Fall of the Hammer and Laccolith Ridge. Fall of the Hammer is an instant for 1 and a red that has target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to another target creature. Laccolith Ridge is an or enchantment for a red mana that has whenever enchanted creature becomes blocked, you may have it deal damage equal to its power to target creature instead of dealing combat damage. These will allow us to take out any pesky technical creatures that don't want to block us. We can also use Vine Snare, an instant for 2 and a green that has prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn by creatures with power 4 or less. So this for us is going to act as a one-sided fog that will prevent any risks from multiple blockers and even nullify death touch or infect scenarios. And in combat, we're going to pump our creatures with more creatures. So here we're going to use the Blood Rush effect, where we can discard creature cards to pump our attacking creatures. These are on Rubblebelt Maka, Slaughterhorn, and Zertos Swine, and will provide significant pumps on the cheap. More importantly, these pump effects are not cast, so they can't be easily countered, and our opponents won't be able to stop us from steamrolling them. But how are we going to keep all of these beasts coming? Because our deck is so creature-focused, we can use dig spells, like Lead the Stampede, a sorcery for 2 and a green that will allow us to keep all of the creatures amongst the top 5 cards of our deck. For more consistent draw, we have Monarch abilities, like Crimson Fleet Commodore, so this will allow us to draw twice as many cards over the course of the game. Sure, our opponents could take the Monarch from us, but our deck is built to smash, and most of our creatures have trample, so we can safely assume that we will be in possession of Monarch for most of the game. In addition, we've got one-shot effects like Cascade, Unannoyed Altasaur, and Natural Reclamation. So normally, the high mana cost of these cards would make them very difficult to play, but with our commander making so much mana, they won't be a problem, and so they're going to come in as bombs with a bonus card off the top. Speaking of our commander's mana, how are we going to take advantage of that ability? First up, it's a tap ability, so we are going to untap our commander again and again using Quirion Ranger and Secret Skybreak. These cards will give our commander 1 additional activation each turn, therefore giving us lots of ramp. We can then take advantage of this with not just our expensive creatures, but also with a few key spells, one of which is Choking Vines, an instant for X and a green that has play only when blockers are declared. X target attacking creatures are considered blocked. Choking Vines deals 1 damage to each of those creatures. So with this spell in hand, we can safely swing out at an opponent with every creature except our commander. Then, if any opponent wants to swing wide at us, we can simply tap our commander, make a huge amount of green mana, and cast this to block as though our board had never swung in the first place. But how are we going to win? So we're going to throw massive creatures at our opponents until we crush them, and if that fails, we can use our commander's second ability to burn our opponents directly. To swing through, we've got multiple spells like Barrage of Boulders, a sorcery for 2 and a red that has Barrage of Boulders deals 1 damage to each creature you don't control. And if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, creatures can't block this turn. So this will function to prevent our opponents blocking us and will even ping all of our enemies' creatures. I've used this to blow up an army of goblins more than once, completely turning the game around. In addition, Temur Battle Rage is a perfect pump spell for this deck. It's an instant for 1 and a red that has target creature gains double strike until end of turn. And it also has Ferocious. That creature also gains trample until end of turn if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. So this is going to give any one of our big creatures double strike and trample, which could possibly win the game for us on its own. We should also keep our commander's second ability in mind. With this, there are 2 enchantments that I want to focus on. The first is Snake Umbra, an or enchantment for 2 and a green that has enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has whenever this creature deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card, and it also gives that creature totem armor. So Snake Umbra is a nice piece of protection for our commander, but it will also allow us to draw a card every time we blast our opponent, since it's not picky about whether the damage dealt comes from combat or an ability. More importantly is that the damage dealt by our commander is based off of its power, giving it a baseline of 4, which is not the best. If we want to win, we need to pump those numbers up. And for that, I'm using Predatory Hunger, an ore enchantment for a green mana that has, whenever any opponent successfully casts a creature spell, put a +1 counter on enchanted creature. This enchantment will grow our commander over the course of the game without it being at risk in combat or interrupting its ability to give us mana. By the time that we have enough spare mana to activate the burn ability, Predatory Hunger should make our commander's ability lethal for any opponent. And that is our Leafkin Avenger deck tech. It's got the highest mana curve of any Pauper deck I've built so far, and it is uniquely able to support that high mana curve. This deck is going to lay down threat after threat that our opponents will be pushed to address, until all of their answers are used up and then we can just blow them away. This deck is going to run us a mere $13, including the sideboard. The deck list is in the description, so check that out when you get a chance. Please like and subscribe, tell us what you'd like to see from us, and come back next week when we get really explosive with the Is It Guild.